right. Hey, everyone. So as you all know, this meeting is recorded and will be uploaded to YouTube. So I think in this meeting, we could discuss the planned tasks for 1.18. So I've got a bunch of items added and others have added as well. So the first, I think, main item that we have for 1.18 is the framework migration, phase 2. We will try to deprecate all the old paths in the core scheduler that executes predicates and priorities. Those right now are not exercised at all. And so we can remove them, and once they are removed, we can change the default configuration of the scheduler from being defined in terms of predicates and priorities to be defined in terms of plugins. And also, lastly but not least, is moving the actual code from the predicates and priorities to be in the plugins files. While we do all of that, we need to make sure that cluster autoscaler can integrate properly with us. Right now, they vendor our code, and then they basically get a list of all the predicates that the scheduler configures, and they execute them. So since we are removing that, we need to make sure that they are able to integrate with the framework directly. So creating a framework and then execute, for example, run filter plugins, or run pre-filter and then run filter, etc. So hopefully that there are the items of basically switching the default configuration to be in terms of plugins, and breaking down metadata calculation into pre-filters. We need to do those two pretty quickly so that the cluster autoscaler team has enough buffer to experiment and try to migrate to the framework. Without those, they can't do it really. Anybody has any questions or concerns about phase 2? Anyone heard any feedback about 1.17? I know it's still like they are still accepting patches. Hopefully we don't get any like negative feedback or negative issues related to basically we changed a lot in 1.17, so I'm just hoping that we did not really impact the interface in any way or form or shape, like basically the behavior that people expect from the scheduler. Mike, you're like OpenShift customers, did you guys move to 1.17, or I don't think you did, right?
We aren't on 117 yet for any of our stuff. I don't think we're still on 116, but I think we're moving to 117 soon. Okay,
so we're looking for you because you guys are like one of the first adopters for like the latest releases. GKE is going to be there in a few months, so hopefully we get earlier feedback.
Okay, yeah, I think our next release is going to be on 117.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, sounds good. So the second item we had discussed during the during KubeCon. I discussed that with Ravi and Wei. A multi-config scheduler. We've had multiple requests about how they can how customers can do bin packing, and the idea of running like a second scheduler just to do that for a segment of their workloads didn't seem right, especially on managed platforms like on whether it's Microsoft, Google, or anywhere else. And so we had this idea of having the scheduler, the default scheduler itself, try to behave differently depending on the workload type. And the interface that we sort of felt can be appropriate is the existing scheduler name. So basically a scheduler, the default scheduler will be watching for 2 or more scheduler names. and we can tie them to internally to different framework profiles, to different profiles that are based on different framework configurations. For example, profile 1 would be the default profile that we have right now, which is mostly about like spreading, and then we can create a second profile that alters the scoring functions to optimize for bin packing, and those can coexist, and we would execute either of them depending on which scheduler name the pod specified. In a cluster where you have the ability to, you can always have the ability to divide your cluster into node pools using node affinity or even using taints and tolerations. That feels like makes a lot of sense, so that you wouldn't get too much overlap in terms of the two profiles behaving opposite to each other. But at the same time, you'll have like one managed service that can support different types of workloads on different segments of the cluster. So I haven't the issue there to start the discussion. Thanks for everyone who commented on it. I think Aldo will take over on that one. He will craft a KEP, and hopefully we will get this done in 1.18. My intuition is that we will have a single profile by default so that we maintain the current behavior. Maybe in 1.19 we can introduce a second one, like the bin packing one. So it would be like by default packaged with the default scheduler, because I feel that like best fit and worst fit, as like I heard from Brian Grant, those like two scheduling or placement strategies that are very, very common. But we're, of course, like, we're going to open this for discussion, and that's not really for now. It's once we have that feature implemented. Anyone has any feedback on this, concerns?
I just add some comment to clarify that, because yeah, this is a super good feature, and which is the users asking not only the users who are running multi-scheduler about facing the racing issue, but also that because we have right now we have the minimum unit is plugin, so we can flexibly combine no matter if the plugin is from upstream or downstream, we can combine them together in whatever format you want and combine them into a profile. Right? So this is going to give the user the most flexibility. So I just want to mention that. And I think in some point we should have some good way to promote that to let the users know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Sounds good. So the third feature is carried from the last release, adding the default topology spreading. This is Aldo's KEP. Hopefully this is gonna get done in 1.18.
I guess the only change that I will introduce sooner is that the configuration is within the framework instead of being part of the component config, such that possibly multiple configuration of schedulers can have different default spreading as well.
Right, you mean it's part of the plugin config?
Yes.
So the API for specifying a default spreading behavior is going to be a plugin config parameter to even pod spreading.
Right, instead of being component config.
Exactly, which I think makes more sense. Yeah. The next feature is improving schedule frameworks. Chong has done like a tremendous job trying to investigate that area in general, and basically try to converge with what we have right now with in the scalability SIG. So he will try to import most of the principles that they have there around how the workloads are created, how the metrics are collected, and how they are reported. So him and Jan and two other contributors will be doing this. I think it's extremely important task of really solidifying our insights, so how we monitor the scheduler behavior as we now start to you know, try to support larger and larger workloads, and performance is becoming more and more critical, especially with the idea of having multiple config schedulers. Now, basically, we're promoting that within the same cluster, you're going to have multiple workloads, and so that typically means you're going to have larger clusters with that basically gets scheduled using the same process, a scheduler process. So we need to be as efficient as we can, and we need to monitor that all the time, watch out for regressions, etc. And also try to craft new workloads that mimics better what workloads we see in the wild, so that we don't really have those, you know, synthetic workloads that doesn't really give us any signal of how the scheduler is doing in practice. Any comments or feedback? Sounds good. So the other feature is promoting component config to beta. I think if we are going with the with the multi-config scheduler thing, that's going to require component config changes. So we either going to do V1 alpha 2 first, or we do it V1 beta directly. Either, I think I'm fine with either. I would love to have component config graduate as soon as possible because we want to duplicate policy. But we'll see what Aldo will come up with in his CAPE and what are the trade-offs there. If there are any concerns moving to beta and at the same time adding those changes, I think I would prefer that. And the other one is having a new repo for plugins. So that's Way's suggestion in order to consolidate efforts around creating out of 3 plugins in one place, so that we are able to share code and better exercise the framework APIs. I don't know if Wei has any more, if you have any more comments or thoughts on this.
Yeah, so this is also we discussed during the KubeCon. So basically, to promote the scheduling framework, one of the motivation is that we want the default scheduler to be more flexible to support more kinds of workload. For example, right now we don't support the batch workloads pretty well, and because right now some companies already use early adopter of that to build some custom plugins. So I want to engage them to cooperate in open source way to contribute that kind of plugins to resolve the similar requirements, so that we don't need duplicates work, right, in the community. That is my motivation. And how is the code being maintained, and how developers iteratively? Right now, I think maybe it's the subrepo is a good option, but we can see which is the good way to put the code and negotiate the cooperation and development. Yeah, let's see.
So the last, but the last one it was, I didn't add it to the tricks yet, but I think it's Shinku who from Tokyo. I think he proposed doing like adding a new extension point to impact how victims are chosen during preemption. I think that's a good idea. It's something that can be customizable, not necessarily needs to be hard-coded in the scheduler. So he has already like a proposal, like a short proposal with pros and cons, but he'll follow up on that with a KIP and see how that one goes. I think it's super useful and very reasonable evolution of the framework.
Yeah, just one comment maybe I will put in the issues that in 118 we already have too many works in our plate. Maybe we can come up with a cap in this release and start implementation in the next release.
I agree. I completely agree. Yeah, I think we have enough risk in 1.18 with the phase 2 migration. So once that's done, I think we are better, I think, equipped with adding more features to the framework and in the isolation of the migration that's happening at the same time. So, all right. Okay. So this is all I have. I've been working on a few optimization opportunities here and there with Affinity. So I've sent like a couple of PRs. I have one as well that I'm gonna send today. So there is this idea that I've been thinking about, which is creating a pod info type in the scheduler, making it like a first class type similar to node info. And basically the idea there is any pre-computation that we need to do on the pod, static computation, not something that changes over time. Basically when the cache sees the pod for the first time, that pod info annotated state gets calculated, and that's it. Example of this includes things like creating, label selector from label selector, which is extremely expensive to do while evaluating affinities and pod spreading. Other things like I don't know, like for example, calculating pod resource, like pod level resources, so that we don't really need to, sum up everything every time we do it. So and etc. Like this type of static state, I think it's useful to annotate it and have it as part of the cache so that it doesn't get computed every time we look at the pod. You would think that this type of state is required only when the pod is scheduled, but in some cases it's not. Like again, we're computing antipod affinity, we need to look at the existing pods, so we have to create, for example, those selectors again and again. And it's hard to cache them right now. We could come up with our own, like, caching pattern, like at least recently used that we advocate plugins to maintain, but I'm not really well settled on which one is better. One provides you with, like, we keep the if we have that caching pattern where that expires every once in a while, and so if you don't find the pod info there, you're just gonna create it, so there's no problem. But it's something to maintain. There's a thread there, a goal routine there that needs to garbage collect, etc., and make sure that it's well maintained. On the other hand, if we create that pod info type and we make it part of the scheduler cache, it's going to add more memory overhead because it's going to be always there, whether the pod is being executed or not or whatever. So it will always be there. So at scale, since pods are like 2 orders magnitude, typically larger in number than number of nodes, so that might be a concern. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on this. I'm gonna create an issue just to start the discussion around this. Maybe we can also brainstorm what other things that pod info could have that would make it easier for downstream plugins. And basically, instead of doing pre-computations in every single cycle, we do it once per pod lifetime.
Parsing, right?
Yeah, mostly parsing related things. Exactly.
Well, in the topic of garbage collecting, you don't actually need a thread, because if you keep a fixed size,
True.
once you run out
Yeah,
of
we'll
cache,
just get out.
yeah, so that shouldn't be a problem. I guess what we need to answer is it very unlikely that something is not used? Something like the resources that a pod is using is something that we need
Once,
once.
probably, yeah. But other things that we will need when evaluating other pods, like the selectors.
Yeah, but what about the pod resources predicate? Doesn't that need?
It needs it once when that specific pod gets scheduled.
Okay.
So, but you don't need it once the pod is scheduled.
Mhm.
But yeah, so all of this is in the context of trying to, like, we focused a lot on the happiest day scenario or the vanilla workloads that doesn't use any of our features, trying to optimize that. I think we get to the point where we are really well optimized there. But now we need to focus more on optimizing the other features so that we encourage using it at scale. So that's where I'm basically coming from.
Yeah, I think this is good. And one more comment is that even with the regular happy path, it can help because of the symmetric characteristic of
That's
the
true.
pod.
Well, I mean, I did optimize that out. Right now, affinity has 0 impact if you don't use it in the cluster, because we track which nodes has pods with affinity.
But if there is only one,
so it will be only that node.
Sorry?
It will be only that node.
Okay, only that node. Okay.
Yeah. So that part is that's one of the things that I did as well, like in the like closer to 1.17, is making sure that if a feature is not used, its impact is 0. Like so that's one of the things that I think now it's true. And now we can focus on different features in isolation.
I see. Thanks.
The good thing about the cache, though, like if we have this pod info, or we already have a node info, and every plugin needs to know about it. And if a plugin needs something new from the pod, or the node needs to change that part of the code. Whereas if we have a cache, then we can, it's an agnostic cache, then any plugin can put anything in the cache and benefit, and they don't need to change the pod infrastructure or the node infrastructure.
My concern here is that you can't really, like least recently used might not be the best criteria to decide which pod infos should be evicted from the cache, because when you evaluate a pod to be scheduled in the cluster, you are moving across nodes, right? So in a window. So if in the previous scheduling cycle you looked at this group of nodes, so you looked at those specific pods, you're not going to look at those pods until very later. It's not because of it's because of the nature of the scheduling cycle, and I'm afraid that cache will always have pods that will never be used because you keep moving like this. So by the time that the pod gets expired, I'm going to use it. I want to use it, so we'll be forced to calculate it again and again. So yeah, my concern is about the strategy, how we expire the cache.
But well, it depends on the size as well.
Yeah, I mean, if up to a specific size, we basically say don't care, and then only when it exceeds a specific size. So.
Yeah. something definitely to explore.
Okay. I've got 2 more minutes and just open the floor for any other discussions, discussion items. All right. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay, thanks.